On. Okay, so initiative and referendum, 7 p.m. What's today? The 22nd.
22nd. My mother would be 101 if she was alive.
All members are present. The first thing I wanted to cover is that Patty has graciously agreed to take meeting notes. And what I told her was the only thing we really need, because it's recording and it's mostly for our information and for the larger group, is just what are the topics we've discussed. And then if we took any action on one of those topics, which I don't expect we would be doing tonight, it would be a little early for action. The other thing is I intend to use the Roberts Rules simplified, the same thing we use in the big meeting, which basically for us just means raise your hand to speak. Don't just jump in. And Patty, if you want to speak, you speak up, because I don't see you on my screen. But everybody else, just raise your hand and I'll recognize you. And then I will always, whatever topic we're on, I will always speak last as the chair. So you guys all get to go first. And I think what we want to do, I was on the electeds and appointeds this morning, and what we did was we wound up everybody talking about, I mean, you've all sent your ideas about what you wanted to accomplish or talk about in this committee. But what I'd like to do, because it was really useful this morning, is to go around and have each of you talk about what are the things that you would like to do or like to accomplish here. And I'll just go in alphabetical order. So Dave, would you start, please?
Yeah. I guess I would like to do a couple of things. I think it'd be really healthy to get a review and see how the role of initiatives and referendum and mini initiatives are played and how they play out in our current charter, and see how effective are they? Are they actually happening? And if they are being passed, are they being followed? I'd like to have a little discussion or find some kind of research about that. And I suspect that the idea I put forward originally is that I think we should pull back on the limitation that financial the initiatives cannot have any unspecified cost to the county. I think that is kind of prohibitive to the right of initiative, and I think that there's probably evidence that the county has unfairly restricted good policies being at least going to the voters, if not being passed. I think that's something I'd like us to see, explore that, and maybe even put forward a suggestion about that. And in the list of ideas that were put forward for this committee, I think the idea of electronic signature gathering is a really interesting one, and it would be it's being tried in Michigan, and I think it's a really interesting idea. I think it'd be really fun and exciting for us to do here, and at least try. I don't know if our IT could handle it so far, but it'd be fun I think it'd be a really exciting thing. I think we need to have an exciting county here. I think initiatives make us an exciting county. I get off the ferry, and I see people in Skagit Valley or in Anacortes. I think they don't have the rights we have. That as citizens, we have more power here than a lot of other places, and I think we're really blessed to have that. And I would love to see even more of that, and have initiatives make life exciting. I've run 3 of them, and I just love the smell of electricity in the air when you're gathering signatures and taking it to the government. It's fun. And I think it's a really good, engaging process. It gets people involved in engaging their society, and it's also a form of speech, and it's also citizens legislation. But so electronic signatures, I think we should look at and see if that is something feasible. And then also, I think Paul Dawson had some interesting ideas about changing the percentages of signatures required. When I worked in Olympia, and I worked with he was, for 20 years, the guy was the director of elections for the state of Washington. He had a lot of sage advice on how to look at things. He said that a good system of initiatives passes about half of them. About half of them that get on the ballot pass, which means that some good ideas are being put forward and people are actually thinking about them and saying, okay, these ideas are good and these ideas are bad. But it's not all, it's like it is using its role as a kind of a correction of what the political class is not addressing. But it's not all like the kooks running the store, but it's also a healthy correction. So I think if half the ideas are passing, that's probably a sign of a good system. So those are just kind of the ideas I'd like us to see address. Thank you.
Okay, and alphabetically, I think that makes you next, Patty.
Okay, my only preconceived thought about this is the requirement for the amount of signatures, because we have such an exciting county here and we have such an involved county, and people are in elections, you know, they're voting. And to get a percentage of all the people who voted in our county to, in order for the, 15% is a pretty lot of people of our county. So, I think we need to look at that, because I know how hard it is to gather signatures when you have an initiative. And I don't know, it's so great to have a county that votes, but at the same time, then it makes it harder to get our initiatives out there. That was my only thing. Everything that Dave said, I totally agree with, and I'm just excited about it too, but I really want to see that, as a possibility, so that those initiatives at least get started and get in there. That was it.
Okay, Liz.
Yeah, I'm going to double amen what David said, and Patty, amen. Yes, it's extremely exciting county, and to take it, up a notch. And for me, I think I need to say this by way of backing up to 2014, which I joined a group of about 30 people who walked from Los Angeles to Washington, D.C. for the environment. And yeah, it was a life-altering journey in a lot of ways. But the reason I bring it up is because state by state by state that we went through, you would see, so in New Mexico, in Iowa, in Pennsylvania, we would hear a repeated theme from people is that they thought they had rights and protections that didn't exist. Mm. And so I'm not informed about how strong our initiatives are, how enforceable our policies are, but that's why I showed up, is to really make sure that what's in place for us to self-govern and to say what can and can't happen to our air, to our land, to our water, really has teeth and is defensible. Because most of the time what we heard is people were devastatingly, I mean, the stories that we saw heartbreakingly discovered that they didn't have a right to protect their farm, their water. Anyway, so that's why I showed up, is for us to look and say, if challenged, how strong is what we've put in place.
Okay.
So,
Anne Marie.
Yeah, thank you. I come to this as a kid, as a young person, probably in my 30s, in California. I worked on the first tobacco tax initiative, which passed. And then I worked on the Mountain Lion initiative, which passed. And then when I came to Washington State and retired, I worked on the Sanctuary initiative, which passed, and through the county council. And I worked on the REIT, the real estate tax for housing. And I saw some things there that I found kind of interesting. And so when this came up, I was like, okay, what's this county doing? What's that county doing? So I've been kind of in the MSRC saying, what are these other counties? What are their percentages that they're required for signatures? So kind of in the weeds, you know. But at the same time, I'm hearing from other voices that it's not easy to pass initiatives in Washington state. So there's lots of questions I'd like to ask. I'd like to find out, well, we have a 15% requirement. Whatcom has an 8%. This is for signatures. A couple other counties, I'm going to kind of create a grid for us of what they have, you know, and what's the negative of not requiring a lot of signatures, you know, so that we can look at it from both sides, because I'm always much more positive. And then what's the story on the money? What's everybody talking about with the money? You know, like you can't pass this unless you identify certain sources of funding. Okay, so how many counties do that? And why do they do that? And what's the rationale behind it? So that we can really peel back some of those layers and understand how our county government got where it is. Another big issue I saw when we did the sanctuary issue was the San Juan County Council didn't want to do that. And it was only because really women on Lopez and Orcas organized and pushed it. And then we got a handful of women over on San Juan and we pushed it. And the prosecuting attorney, because he works for the county council, was not supportive of this. But yet when it came time to write the statement about what this initiative did, there was a lot of push and pull and push and pull. And we had some really, as you know, in San Juan County, you can have some of the best lawyers in the world. We had really good lawyers, and they were having a lot of trouble with our prosecuting attorney on the wording. So I started looking at, well, what do other counties do when they run up against that? Because we were really running up against this clock where you had to have, you know, this done by this time, and what was being said about the initiative was not what we wanted to be said. So those are kind of some of the pieces that I want to pull back and kind of look at. And I think it's healthy to have initiatives. I don't want to have a situation though, where we no longer have county government because everything is by initiative. And I saw that in California, and that's not a place we want to go. So I want to kind of figure out, how do we do this and do this in a sane way so that the people we represent, the people of San Juan County, have a voice, that we don't undermine our elected officials, but that we help them to see the road that we are pushing forward, and we help them understand where their constituents are coming from.
Okay, this is interesting, because I thought I was going to be a stick in the mud here, but Anne Marie's sort of half a stick in the mud. And I want to correct something you said, Anne Marie.
Okay.
The prosecutor does not work for the county council. Prosecutor is an independent elected official. He doesn't have to do anything the prosecutor tells him.
We've had these conversations. I'm like, I elect you, you represent me.
Well, I know, and it depends on the individual, but I'm just saying legally,
Right.
When I was county planning director years ago, I worked with a prosecutor who, at the time, we had a couple of, they were county commissioners then, who were always trying to get the prosecutor to do or approve things that really weren't in the public interest. And he would just tell them, you want to do that? Hire your own attorney. He said, I'm not doing that. And the prosecutor has that authority. So we need to be really clear.
Okay.
Prosecutor doesn't work for the council.
Right.
Prosecutor can decide that he or she wants to go along with the council all the time, but it's not required.
Gotcha.
So just so that's clear. I am not, I want to be clear, I am not at all opposed to initiative. I have collected signatures for so many initiatives, usually at the state level. And Anne Marie, like you, I did it for the housing REIT. So I support the idea of initiative. My concern is the same as Anne Marie's, but maybe a little stronger. I think, California is a perfect example of what happens, that instead of having representative democracy, and we live and work in a representative democracy, you can go so far that the state, the locality, whatever, is run by initiative. And I think that's a horrible situation. There was research done, I remember it was, several years ago, a bunch of students at Cal Berkeley did this supposed initiative petition. And they gathered, I forget, it was thousands of signatures. And it was only a one-page initiative, and it wasn't fine print. So when they handed it to people, you could look at it and see what it said before you signed it. And at the end, it said, and if this doesn't pass, I would like it known that I want to be hanged by the neck until dead in public. And thousands of people signed it. And it's one of the problems with initiative. And when I was collecting initiative signatures for a couple of state initiatives, I would stand at, you couldn't do it in the farmer's market on San Juan, but you're allowed to stand right on the edge. And so I'd stand there and corral people, and people would say, well, what is it about? And I'd tell them honestly what the title was. And just with no thought at all, they just signed. And I thought, wow, I could be telling you anything and you'd sign this.
Yeah.
And you can't, in my opinion, you cannot make it too easy. I think there needs to be a reasonable percentage of signatures. I don't know that 15% is the right number. I wouldn't argue that yet. I like your idea, Anne Marie, of doing some research on what others do and what's a reasonable number. And I think the fiscal requirement is really critical. I worked for the State Department of Ecology for about 20 years. And one of the things you have to do in state government, whenever there's a proposal, a legislator puts forward a proposal for some new activity, new program, whatever, they hand it to whatever department in state government is most appropriate. And you have to prepare a fiscal note. And so you have to estimate what is the likely cost of this if this is passed? What's the cost to implement it? What's the cost to carry it out on an ongoing basis? And when the legislature was in session, we would do loads of fiscal notes. And my feeling is when the county council wants to do something like that, they have to look at their budget and they have to say, okay, how are we going to fund this? And if we have to cut something to pay for it, what are we cutting? I think the citizens should not be able to just say, do this, pass an initiative, and it's your problem, council, figure out how to pay for it. I don't agree with that. So now, anybody who wants to respond to anything anybody said.
I think the initiative process that we have is pretty darn good. And yes, we do need to look at what the cost will be for an initiative. I mean, you can't just pass something and say, hey, do it now. Some of the initiatives that we have passed here, though, are more, well, like the REIT, that had the financial consequences of it and how that was going to be funded. That was cool. Now, were things like the no GMO thing, was that by initiative? Do we know? I think of things up here like when, years and years ago, when jet skis were outlawed. Was that an initiative thing, or was that just something that the county did? So many of our unique laws, who knows where they came from to begin with?
The jet skis was a lawsuit that ultimately resulted in them being banned. GMO, well, it didn't pass, did it?
Yeah, it did.
Did it?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I think that was initiative.
Okay. Yeah, that was a few years ago, but
That's
makes
my
me proud.
understanding also.
Yeah, my, at the time I was still working down in Seattle and living here and going down there and whatever. And I had the little sticker on my car and people would sort of say, well, you're crazy. I like being crazy.
I forget
Dave.
what the root of the jet skis was. I just know that Randy ended up going to the Supreme Court, but my understanding was the people really pushed it. And I don't know if we pushed it in council
Yeah.
and drove
Yeah.
it that way or how we
Yeah.
drove it. But
It
my
was-
understanding was
it
it
was
came
in
from the
council.
ground.
It was in council.
Yeah.
And actually, that was in the days of county commissioners. So
Mhm.
there was no initiative then.
Okay, makes sense.
Yeah.
But I do think, in these times we do have to have, I mean, I worked in the California legislature, so, I understand, the fiscal note aspect of legislation and everything. But I do think that that's something that people that are putting an initiative forward need to look at and propose and figure out how they're going to pay for it. But I don't think it should be a hindrance to moving something forward. I think that should be part of the picture. That should be part of what we're going forward with. And unlike your experience, Dick, when I did both the sanctuary and the REIT, I did the ferry lines, even on San Juan Island. The very first ferry on San Juan Island was a really good hit. But I had a lot of people that said no, and a lot of people that said no to REIT, So you probably knew everybody better than me.
Dave?
Yeah, there's a lot of issues here. I think that there is an issue in terms of just gathering signatures. The public square is shrinking. I mean, we haven't really had a farmer's market here much this year, and grocery stores are dried up. They're much more difficult. It's harder and harder to get signatures these days. So it's just that will be a part of the discussion in terms of electronic signature gathering. If we're able to go that way, I think we'd probably want to keep up a higher percentage of signatures to gather because will be easier to gather signatures. And there's certainly a whole bunch of cans of worms to uncap if we do get to go to electronic signature gathering, even though it is exciting. In terms of fiscal notes, and there's the fiscal note that goes along with legislation, but then there's what the initiative requires currently is to have the how it's going to be paid for within the legislation. And I think it's very different to say this is the impact this will have on the budget, but it's a different thing to say that than it says this is what it's going to cost and how it's going to be paid for within the budget. And so those are two different things. And there's two limits on the right of initiative here. One is that an initiative can only have one subject, and then the other one, it cannot have if it has a cost, it has to be addressed within the initiative. But if you have something like, we'll say like if we have the initiative to ban jet skis or I don't know what the sanctuary city initiative had in terms of funding, but to find a way to pay for that initiative, you're actually adding another issue onto the initiative, because one's the policy you want changed, and the other is the way you're going to pay for it. And those are actually, if you're going to kill an initiative, you're going to do it through the finances of it, not necessarily through the idea itself that it's trying to address. So those are just two thoughts. And also,
So is it state law? Oh, sorry.
Well, go ahead. Where are we going? We can,
Yeah.
Is it state law that says it can only be one subject?
It is.
It is.
But I don't know that applies to local initiative in charter governments. And I think, Dave, I would maybe take issue with you arguing that the cost is a separate issue. I don't think so.
well, I mean, I think we're certainly going to explore that. I mean, if you have, say, you're going to pay for, there's generally you're going to pay for it a different way than the it's a different issue. You're going to pay for mental health services through a property tax. And so those are very different things. You know, and one real quick, Anne Marie mentioned something about ballot titles and ballot messages. I think that we should look at that. How effective are they? How well do people feel they are written? Are we having them written the best way? Because I've found them quite confusing at times. But
David, I had a question for you. I just wondered if you would say a little more about your thinking around that electronic signatures could be easier. I'm not arguing at all. I'm just wondering, with all of the junk mail and the robocalls, and what do you know about how that would work, that would support the process?
well, we're meeting electronically right now. I mean, it's much
Right.
easier to connect with people electronically than it is in person on the street. And I think the last I heard, it was like 63% of the counties on Facebook. I'd really also like to hear about what is the digital divide in our county. And I think
Okay.
we could really, it
Yeah.
could, you could reach out to 15% of the voters rather quickly if you have a internet campaign to gather signatures.
Okay, got it. I had just sort of limited myself to thinking about, sending emails and thinking about, that faucet is pretty tapped and a lot of us just shut it off more and more often. So I know, but I hear you about going out onto the Lopez Rocks or any of the San Juan Facebook pages. And yeah, got it. Thanks.
Yeah.
I want to say something about that too. I like the idea, but we would need to have both kinds of signature gathering. That's kind of obvious, right? Because some people just aren't computer literate, and it's getting to be harder and harder to be that way. One of the things that's cool about it is that it gives the people a chance to actually read the initiative before they go ahead and sign it, because it'll be on the computer in front of them. Whereas when you're on the street, it's a little difficult to take the time to actually read the initiative.
Yeah, go ahead, Anne Marie.
So I wonder if maybe in one of our discussions, we should talk about, we should have someone that can talk to us about, even at the state level, where they are on the electronic signature for initiatives. I mean, I don't know that there's a person that does that, but I'm just kind of, who's the person that we really would need to talk to about that before we were to propose something like that? And how far down the road is something like that? And then I think the second thing that we need to explore more with somebody else is the whole fiscal note issue, and how much of that, and how do we frame that? How do we frame the question, and how do we move that issue forward? Because that's in ours. I didn't see it in Seattle's. Maybe I could be wrong on that. I was just kind of doing this today, kind of trying to create a grid on what the different charter governments had. So I'll try to do that over the next weeks, kind of put something together that looks like a little piece of each one of theirs. But I think this fiscal issue is an important one, and it's one that we need to see if it creates a second issue. And then we also need to know if we do that, are people more successful that pass initiatives that have that kind of fiscal piece to it? I'm just kind of trying to figure out how to make somebody going forward more successful that wants to do something beneficial to the county.
Can I interject something there that I believe the answer to the question about who we could talk to in the state is there are two departments that are involved in that. One is the Secretary of State's office. The other is the Attorney General's office. Does somebody want to volunteer to make a couple of phone calls in the coming week and see if you could get an answer to the question, are they exploring electronic signatures? And maybe, what they know about requirements for establishing a cost or a fiscal note in charter county governments.
I can do that.
Okay.
Yeah, happy to do that. Yeah.
I think if you try those two, Dave, you'll you'll come up with somebody.
Mhm.
And if you don't get anywhere, let me know, because I still do know people in state government.
Okay.
And Dick, I had a question for you when you're ready.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering if you could say a little more about, your, why you came on to this particular group and listening to the four of us, and then where you are, just to kind of give me a sense of, what you've heard and what we need to hear from you.
Well, you won't like my answer, but I'll be totally honest with you.
I'll appreciate that.
Yeah.
When I saw the list of things that people were talking about with initiative and referendum, I said, "Oh my God, there's got to be somebody on there who's taking a somewhat different point of view." So I put my name in for it. You scared me.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Great answer.
It's the truth.
Yeah.
What we want.
Well, I'm just, I come more curious than anything else. And like I said, it was so devastating to see communities who thought that, different laws protected them. And then one of the women we met in Pennsylvania, her family had been on the same farm, a turkey farm, for over 150 years. And then the fracking that occurred around her destroyed, and the people around her slowly sold out, and she didn't. So then she ended up bankrupt because she didn't sell, and she could no longer, they were organic turkeys, she could no longer. So that's just one of many stories. And it came down to that when she went to protect her land, the things that she thought in place that, would kind of seem like common sense, that your county government is going to stand up and prevent things and stand in place, but it's just not the case. So
I think one thing to keep in mind there is we are really fortunate to live on the West Coast, because it's particularly the three coastal states. We have much different laws, and it's because they were all kind of, populist in their origins. We have much better laws in terms of protecting people from those kinds of things. I grew up on the East Coast and remember a lot of that kind of thing. And it's just there was always a different mindset. State law was not nearly as protective, nor were local ordinances. It's a lot different out here. We're in a much better situation.
I love that that's true. And I'm aware that, like, the bee farmers in Oregon, Monsanto came in and sued them. Mm-hmm. And so they were not able to protect their bees. And then, lawsuits went back and forth. And I don't want to go down in the weeds with that kind of stuff, but that's, how do we make certain that as we grow, we grow responsibly in terms of, and I don't even want to call the resources we have, because I don't think that's the right term. And I think we end up thinking of nature as a commodity then. So, but to keep looking at how do we make decisions that, embrace the reality that we cannot survive without a healthy ecosystem, and make sure that the laws we put in place, the ordinances we put in place, the initiatives we put in place, how do we make sure they have teeth? And Anne Marie, I can see your.
Well, I was thinking about one of the Lopez residents I heard from, who talked about the initiative process, and it was particularly about the transient. I think maybe it was our actual, our own whales, but that they were sued by the Whale Watching Association and really never even got to bring that initiative forward because it was stopped in court. And this may be kind of what is the backdrop of people that I'm hearing that says you can't really do initiatives, and I don't know enough about it, to know
Yeah.
whether it's the whales or the fact that Randy had to go, do an amicus with the Supreme Court on the jet skis, that these industries are so big that they come in and kind of take over areas. And, as we become, or as we are, a more and more affluent community, our interests will be, not exactly sure how to say it, but the smaller person will be diminished because our voices become diminished by money. So I think the initiative process is a very important tool for the people of the San Juan Islands. And it's a way for us to protect our homeland and not to be, kind of a red person with that, but it's, we need to do what we can do to help our constituents be successful in the things that they want to put forward, and let the voters decide.
And the answer, as I recall on the whale watch, was that's because the boats operate in state waters, and their argument was that the county can't restrict vessels operating in state waters, only the state could do that. And as I recall, correct me if I'm wrong, Anne Marie, the group did not appeal past Superior Court, but I talked to lawyers who thought the Superior Court made a bad decision on that one, and that they might have prevailed on appeal, but then that's more money. But I think going back to what you said, Liz, we have to be careful about what we can and can't do with the charter. I mean, the charter is really about the structure of county government, how county government operates. It's not about policy. So we have to be careful, I think, that we're not spending our time really talking about policy issues that aren't going to fit in the charter. We won't be able to get them. We won't be able to get them past Randy because they're not appropriate.
I see what we're doing with the initiative and referendum is nuts and bolts, basically. How do we allow people to have initiatives and referendums, and then, what are required? And it's probably in the county charter. And do we want to change any of that? Which is why I sort of went to the percentage change, because it's such a high, we are so good at voting that we have to get a lot of people in our population to sign them. But that's my only issue. I mean, everything else, I want to see initiatives and referendums be possible for people, because yes, they give you influence over the money and over, within reason.
Mhm.
And Dick, maybe you can answer this question for me. Isn't that kind of the initiative and the referendum, isn't that kind of the heart and soul of having a home rule charter?
Well, it's certainly one of the big differences from the statutory county government. I mean, there's a lot of other things too, that you can change the number of elected council members. There's so much of the structure of county government that you can change under a charter. If you're in the statutory county government, the law says you have these offices, these are elected, this is how you do things. It's very black and white. So it's more than, initiative and referendum is a big difference, but it's not the only big difference.
Okay, thank you.
Have you all read what's in the charter now for initiative and referendum?
I have to read it over and over again because it doesn't all stick in my head.
Thank you, Patty. Amen to that.
So we should talk about, we got another 10 minutes or so. We should talk about, okay, we've kind of all expressed this. Where do we want to go next meeting? Dave said he would follow up on a couple of things. Maureen, in my meeting this morning on electeds and appointeds, sent us a paper that's from Municipal Research and Services Group. And I think there's a bunch of stuff in there that's relevant to our conversation. If I'm right about that, I will send that to the rest of you to read before the next meeting. But my question is, where do you want to go from here? Do you want to break these issues down into small pieces? What do you want to, because we need to get to a point, I think, where we're ready to recommend something to the larger group. And so the question is, how do we want to get there?
One question I have, Dick, I forget to raise my hand. It seems like a
That's
small
okay.
group. So the question I have is it helpful if we hear from some groups that have either gone through the initiative process or in the process, gearing up to go through it, in terms of what they see as working or not working? Is that valuable to invite a couple of community members to speak to us?
It's been a while since we had an initiative in this county. Kevin told me something interesting the other day. He did some research and he said I think he said nationally, I'll double check with him, but it's at least across the state of Washington. Every initiative that has been appealed in court, every local initiative that's been appealed in court has lost. Every single one. So the only ones that were passed as if they weren't appealed. And whether that's because they were fundamentally flawed or why, he didn't know off the top of his head. But I thought that was interesting that they lost. So obviously it requires some care about how they're approached. And I don't know how we would, I think it's been long enough. I don't know how we would even find somebody who worked on a prior initiative.
It'd be interesting to know how much of that was related to resources, like you mentioned with the whale group, that they could have taken it to a higher court, but they decided not to, probably because they didn't have the money.
Yeah.
I mean, that would just be, if you're up against the big guns, you've got to
Yep.
have a lot of little people with a lot of money.
Yep.
But it would
Mo-
be interesting to know that, and if that's a major flaw in the Washington state system, and then what needs to be done about that. But I don't know that we have the time or the resources to do that. I think if we break down some of these issues and start looking at them individually, we might be able to kind of come up with a checklist of things that we think would be worthwhile to have the larger group discuss, or we think we ought to make changes in. I mean, I'm more than happy to put together a little grid with the different charter counties that talk about, where they are percentage wise and the money wise, but that's also stuff you can glean off that MSRC database. It's just a way of making it easier for you to look at it. So I just think we need to kind of look at what the issues are and figure out how we get there, and what information do we need that we don't have, so that we know we're moving forward with this in the next few months or not. This seems to be a smaller issue to me, that we could move along with this pretty quickly and kind of have it out there for the whole committee or the whole commission.
I just want to make one comment about the thing that you were talking about, Kevin was saying. I wonder where Tim Eyman is in that. I mean, so many of his initiatives had to be challenged because they were just so costly.
And I resisted saying it when it was my turn to speak the first time, but I kind of put Tim Eyman forward as my poster boy argument for why you don't want initiative to be too easy.
Yeah.
But
And
But he
Maria,
pays his signature collectors.
Yeah. Well,
Anne Marie,
no.
I wanted to
He said,
respond.
excuse me, he says he'll pay them and he doesn't, and then he gets sued by them. Go ahead, Liz.
Well, Anne Marie, I just wanted to say that it would be, so I'm assuming all of you have heard, so Ron Metcalf and Julianne Battaglia have reached out to all of the commissioners. So I know there are two different groups on island who are looking at forwarding an initiative in either the November or the following year, but they're preferring. So it would be easy for me to do two things. One, to connect with the people who were involved in that lawsuit with the whale group and ask them, give them a limited time and give them some pretty clear instructions of what we would find valuable to hear. So it's not a
Not a propaganda for whales.
yeah, it's not that, and it's also not the saga of the trauma that was inflicted on the people who really championed that, but say, just to have a conversation with them to say, here's what would be really helpful if in going forward for us to make some changes. So it'd be easy to do that, and then also people who are looking at forwarding initiatives in the upcoming ballot.
I think, Liz, it would be a better use of our time if you were willing to talk to those people and report back to us. I'm really concerned that that would wind up eating up a lot of time.
Okay.
And at least that would be a way to start, to have you talk to them and come back and report to the rest of us on what you learned. And then we could decide, okay, do we want to have somebody come in and
Yeah,
talk?
I'm happy to do that. And just so I'm real clear about, I was just talking about inviting them to do a 15-minute sort of, presentation, from the ground of what they've experienced or what they're experiencing now. But I can do it. I'm happy to do it. And David.
The first I heard about this issue in terms of the fiscal note was from Kyle Loring, who was their attorney, and he I've talked to him about it, and he said he'd be willing to write or say something to us about it and his experience with it. But
That'd be good.
he was their attorney. He used to be the attorney for the Friends of the San Juan Islands.
He was the attorney, Dave, for the whale watch.
Yeah.
But I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
Oh,
Representing Skagit County, I think was the case.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I can't recall right now what it was, but there was one thing in particular that really didn't seem, like lawful, or it's one of those things as a citizen, you go, really? You're kidding me. And so I apologize. I don't remember what that was now, but I can find that out, or we can have Kyle come speak. What do you all think? How do we want to proceed?
Go ahead, Emery.
Well, I think that group has reached out to us enough that we really should reach back out to them and get their input, because otherwise what's going to happen is it's going to suck up a lot of time at the town halls. So the more that they know that we've heard them and that we give them an opportunity to explain to us what's going on, the more knowledgeable we are and can present a full picture to the commission. I think it's important to present a full picture.
When you say that group, which group are you talking?
I'm talking about, I know Ron and Julianne, and I didn't know Kyle was their representative, but I think if Kyle would probably be, if they knew that Kyle was going to speak with us, that might be helpful too. But I just think that would be Kevin spoke to me about the fact that Kyle had done some research on this. And I think that would be very valuable for us to know.
Okay, I have some concern, I will tell you about. I think a lot of what Julianne and Ron are putting forward is fundamentally policy. And I think this is my view, if anybody on the CRC is going to consider that, it ought to be the committee that's working on the preamble. because to my mind, that's the only place you can put that, because it becomes really so policy in nature, and that's not what the charter is about.
But what about
So
Kyle?
that might be useful. I'll tell you what, Kyle's a friend, a good friend. I'm happy to call him and ask him what he thinks, whether he thinks he would have something useful to tell us. I'll tell him what our job is and what we're thinking about, and see if he thinks he's got something to say that would be useful to us.
Yeah, I would be interested in hearing from him.
Okay, I'll call him.
And I think the question is more that we'd like to hear from him than sorting out whether he has something valuable to say to us that we think he does, that we'd like to hear from him.
Okay, I'll talk to him. I think he's probably a pretty good judge of whether he has anything to say that would be useful to us, but I'll.
Well, no, my point, Dick, is that if you run it through your bias, I just want to make sure that you run it through our collective bias versus, yeah.
That's the duty of the chair. I will
Okay.
understand that. I mean, to explain what everybody's view is. Yeah, no problem with that.
He
But
told me
Kyle, I know Kyle well enough, I can ask him and say, Kyle, here's what, the committee's talking about, and say, do you think you have something that would be useful for everybody to hear? See what he says.
He told me he'd be willing, but that doesn't mean he has something useful. So whatever that's worth there.
Well, and I think, what he's going to say to us is, well, what do you want me to talk about? So I think we have to be clear about, and that's why I just want to kind of walk through it with him. And see.
I think my question to him would be, what flaws were revealed in the process that might be addressed by this commission?
Okay.
But he was only like one
Right.
part of it, the defending the initiative. I think that Juliet and Ron, is that their names? That I think their experience of running the initiative and that experience is what we'd want to hear about. Not the policies that the initiative was actually about. I think that's what we're interested in, is just initiatives, not so much what the policy that they're trying to change. And so definitely, I think they would have something to say about that. But yeah, what you're saying about the policy that they're trying to change definitely belongs more in the preamble or.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If we could get them to speak about their experience,
Process.
the process,
Yeah.
Right.
and not go off into the other part of it, which isn't going to help us. It's just taking up our time. That'd be okay.
Yeah.
Just process.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
But just a reminder, it's important to listen.
And Marie, I love that you brought that up, because here we are talking about, having, an invigorated populace, and then we're talking about not including or not listening. So thank you.
Okay. All right. Do we have a sense of what we want to do next meeting? Because I'm not going to just dictate it and say, here's the agenda. So
And we did want to establish a regular meeting date as well. So
yes, I had that as the last item on the agenda.
Okay.
So does this work for everybody, or is it a problem for anybody?
it's not a great time for me are there, I can probably make it work if it was a good time for everybody else. And how long of meetings are we planning on doing?
The answer to that one is, I figured we'd start with an hour and see how it goes. I would like to, if we expand it, but it's open to all of our discussion. I would love to see us try to stick to no more than an hour and a half for our meetings. But how do you all feel about that?
I've got a lot of different Zoom stuff at a lot of different times. Nothing right now at night, except for our thing that goes from 4 to 6 and the Grange meetings, which start at 6. But I'm good with an evening meeting. It, you know, it works. This one worked.
Okay. David?
It works great for me. I mean, so yeah, I appreciate it being evening, but I understand other people.
Yeah, I'm good with this, and I can, if people wanted to move it to 6:30, I'm good with that. I'm good to going, to 8:30, starting to get into my like downtime where I start getting,
Yeah.
into the next zone, because I got a lot going on during the day. But I'm good with this. I think this is actually a pretty good time. Nobody else has this corner.
Yeah.
And if we want to hold it to an hour, that's an incentive to all of us to be expeditious and brief. And I'm not saying I wouldn't do it. My wife asked me to try to protect 6 to 7 o'clock for a dinner hour.
Yeah.
And I said I would, 'cause she has a couple of Zooms she does on a regular basis. And just trying to juggle those and say, okay, can we have a dinner hour?
That sounds good. And I think it's going to be important for us to all do homework,
Yes.
and we just need to kind of direct each other as to, okay, it would be good if we all read this. It'd be good if we all looked at this, or here's something that you will find informative, and then try to do it.
Yeah. And thank you, the three of you who are going to follow up and do some things. And I will see if when I finish reading that paper, which I'll do tomorrow from MSRC, if it seems appropriate, I'll fire it off to all of you.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Back to the
Okay.
timing thing, 7 o'clock is better for me as well. So if we're going to stick with Mondays, let's do it from 7 until maybe, even if we just say 7 till 8:15. Then,
Well, I'll tell you what, if
Okay.
people will leave open
yeah,
till 8:30, let's just say that our goal will be to do it in an hour, but with the understanding that everybody's available for up to another half hour if we needed it as we get farther into this. Does that work for everybody?
I like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you. Great meeting, guys.
Yeah,
Yes.
It's going to be a fun game.
yeah. It's pretty exciting.
And it's always better when everybody doesn't agree, right?
Absolutely. Make it exciting.
Yeah.
Boring otherwise.
Okay.
Great, 5 minutes.
Thank you.
All right. See you
Thank
all.
you. Good night.
See you on Wednesday. Oh, in the recording.
Yes, and the recording.
Stop.